The Dhamma is the cure. That sentence is complete to address all ailments, all difficulties, all challenges. I know it is a statement that might be seen by many as a too much of a generalization. But when we look at the various different aspects of the Dhamma and how it can be applied to each of our unique situations, our circumstances, and really give it the benefit of a doubt, just the whole process, just look at it critically, yes, but then applying it honestly. And we see that it is a cure, the best. Okay, if that was that simple, then why did the Lord Buddha teach for 45 years? Well, there is a slight problem. And the problem does not lie with the Dhamma, it lies within us, with us. We bring in a lot into any situation, into the ways that we try to solve problems, or even to try to understand what is this thing called dukkha, what is this thing called, the set of four noble truths. What is that? So tell me something I don't know. Oh, it's too simple, etc. So we have a lot of dust in our eyes, one could say, when we approach the Dhamma, when we, even after years of studying or practicing, one needn't be surprised to find out buckets of dirt or dust or sand in their eyes. One in particular is self doubt, which is a problem that arises again and again and again, not just in the field of Buddhist practice, but in any field, and just living life itself, going through the, and growing through the various stages of one's life. As one journeys through childhood and goes into adolescence, all those uncertain, confusing times that a child's brain goes through, and then into young adulthood, past teenage years. And this is just this biochemical lump of tissue and brain cells that we're talking about. And when we introduce the outside factors, outside conditions, outside influences, then we're in for a ride. And kileshas that we have come to see and encounter again and again and again in Dhamma talks, in the suttas, in discussions, in Q&As, but most importantly in our own lives. They really love self-doubt, because that's where we have all three of them coalescing. That's when we really take us down, getting us at our Achilles. So self-doubt in confusing times, in our confusing times, I find to be a statement, a sentence that reflects what we see in and around us, especially in this time period in the world today, irrespective of where we might be living, what cultures we come from, what, etc., social groups. But how does this relate back to the Dhamma? If self-doubt is pretty intense, that can really throw us in a loop, so much so that we might even leave the path. Because the kileshas, the defilements that we have, the lust or greed in us, the anger, the aggression, which we see a lot of these days, resentment, aversion, and ignorance or delusion. They know everything about us because they function on memories, and they have their influence on us being utilized in the form of, let's say, self-doubt. Self-doubt is a very restless state. It is submerged in delusion. And it has the flavors of constant comparison. Another word we can use for that is conceit. The Buddha uses the word mana. And he uses it in its three phases or three facets. One is comparing oneself to others, but from a lower point, meaning you are better than me. The second one would be from a superior position to someone else or others, and that is, you are less than me, or I am better than you. And then the third one is, oh, we are pretty much similar on the same, plateau, same level, eye to eye. But essentially, they're all conceit. Now, the problem is, due to anicca, due to impermanence, what happens is, we know nothing stays the same. So even if a person is feeling good about themselves, let's say in the field of, or in the practice of meditation, they get to a nice, comfortable way station, shall we say, a good experience, a wholesome experience, a jhana, or just one of the factors of the jhanas, it won't stay. One of the things that really happens with as a person progresses is the experiences of insight. I used to struggle so much to go ahead and write them down because I knew they would be like I would forget them. But when they occur, and I see this with students as well, when they occur, it's like it's an eye opener. Because that is something that it might have been in front of them all their lives, but it never hit home for them with such power, such clarity. That's why we call them aha moments. And the person feels existential transformation because of that insight. That's why we call it insight. You penetrated. You saw beyond what was mundane, just to be picked up by the eyes. You went beyond that. That's why we call it vipassana. Seeing through, penetrating, going deeper. But those too will pass. And so long as we are anchoring ourselves to these things, to these insights, and because the first characteristic of existence is anicca, those also fall in the same category. And if we are attached to them, they will throw us in a loop. Hence, conceit comes in. So we start talking with our Kalyana Mittas or refer back to the suttas, and then we can do a lot of contrasting, compare and contrast, which is conceit again. Guess what that does? It creates fluctuations in the mind, and what that means is restlessness comes in. Restlessness comes in thanks to uncertainty, not having a solid ground beneath us. Because the person had just landed, as it were, onto this solid ground of insight. I mean, come on. It's a major realization. From then on, it should be like wide open doors, straight to Nibbana. No zigzags, no ditches, no potholes to go through, but just don't get me wrong, sometimes it does happen like that. But for the majority of us, we still need work. So long as these, what we call asavas, or the contaminants, we're using the word defilements now, they are manifesting in different forms, in different fashion. Because they will use every single emotion in the emotional vocabulary, in the dictionary of emotions and thoughts, which here we can talk and actually refer back to sanya and sankhara. Sanya oftentimes is seen as perception, memories, assumptions. And then sankharas are what we do, what the mind does with these assumptions, with these memories, with these images, the construction, the fabrication, as we go into a tailspin, be sucked into the stories that we build out of these perceptions that come and go. Okay, different fancy ways of explaining, yes, they're valid, but how does that relate to us at that moment when we are feeling self-doubt? When we are spinning like, a plane that has lost one of its wings and now it's in a downward spiral, just going. This is where it's essential for us to have a solid object of meditation. A solid, something that's definitive, something that is almost tangible, if not tangible. Now, sometimes students come and say, Bhante, in tough times, sometimes it's hard for me to go back to metta, to generate that sense of upekkha, or any of the Brahma Viharas. It takes me a while to come back to that state. Meanwhile, my mind is all over the place. Well, it would be foolish of any teacher or myself to go ahead and say to the student, no, 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 stick to it, just go back to metta. Meanwhile, there's a gap. There's a gap where the person is really struggling to get a handle of their awareness. Because we need to have a handle on it. The pilot has to get his hands on the steering wheel or the I don't know what you call that, the handle that he uses to gain control of the plane. And so long as the hindrances are there, we're going to be slapped around unless we're arahants. And as we're getting closer and closer, we're progressing on the path. Despite all these challenges, despite the potholes, despite the punches that we get from the defilements within us, they get more sneaky, the defilements, that is. Even convincing at times. They use language of the Dhamma to attack that sense of confidence, which the Lord Buddha talked about as saddha, or faith. Earlier, before we actually began the sit today, I was briefly mentioning of the importance of coming back to your own goodness, and how anicca does come in and shake the ground beneath us, shake us at our roots. So we need to have something that we kind of use as our baseline and not count on how it felt like yesterday or in a past retreat when we attained a certain level of peace, for example, but come back to now. So for this reason, I recommend, of course, when the student is able to bring in metta just like that, come back to their heart, for example, or any of the jhanic factors, beautiful. However, if the student is really having a tough time and they're in a spin, they're completely self-doubt, for example, is overwhelming, then come back to the body. You're not going to find anything more definitive than that. Even when we are disassociated from our body, that's what anxiety does, and we're living in anxious times, perhaps the worst in history. That's where the confusion parts come in. Then take something that is really loud coming in, a sensation that is the loudest. Maybe the heat, where there is pressure being applied, perhaps because of your weight or how you're sitting or how you're standing, etc., etc. Or just the breath, just to kind of get your bearings. A few breaths, and then slide your way back to metta. Slide your way back into upekkha. Now, for some of us, as the practice goes deeper, it might even be the image of a Buddha in the mind. Or coming back to their virtue. Would I kill another human being? For example. Would I lie? If someone pushes me enough, would I go ahead and cheat? Would I have sexual misconduct? Would I betray the trust of someone? Would I get intoxicated? Sometimes that is enough to get yourself back, to grab your mindfulness, your awareness from the hands of the defilements that have stolen it away from you by pulling you into the mind, which is full of cognitive distortions, by the way, hence the self-doubt. Unfortunately, we give so much credence, authority to our cognition. to the point where it starts no longer to serve us. It serves the defilements. Where we start to analyze, and remember the restlessness, it gets worse. Because now we are back into the domain of sanya, which are perceptions, thoughts, concepts. Which is what we need to really watch out for. We see Lord Buddha mentioning how important it is to be cognizant of the danger posed by perceptions or sanya, as well as the Arya Savakas, the Arahants. They mention it again and again. One of the suttas I mentioned before in the long discourses, Digha Nikaya, where Venerable Ananda is listing the wonderful and marvelous qualities of Lord Buddha, starting with his decision and as a bodhisattva, to be reborn as a human being for the last time in order to become a Buddha, all the way down to the way the Buddha teaches. And then meanwhile, the Buddha is not there. He's resting. This was later in his life where he really suffered from backaches. So he would take more rest during the day for a few minutes, and then he would come out. So he joins the congregation where Venerable Ananda was giving this lecture to the bhikkhus, and Lord Buddha goes and stands, and they respectfully, greet him. And then he says, "What conversation did I interrupt, Ananda?" That was such a beautiful way to make an entrance. He would always use that, what was the nature of the conversation that was going on prior to my arrival? Is another way, he would say. And then the Venerable Ananda says, Bhante, I was listening to the bhikkhus, the marvelous and wonderful qualities of the Tathagata, the Buddha. And then after, it's a long discourse, so he repeats the whole thing, and the Buddha gives his approval, and then he says, then in that case, Ananda, go ahead and remember this other marvelous and wonderful quality of the Tathagata. And this connects us back to what I was mentioning earlier about thoughts or perceptions or concepts. And he says, Ananda, the Tathagata has the ability to observe when thoughts arise, when they are sustained, even for a very brief moment, and when they vanish. The Tathagata is able to see perceptions, concepts, when they arise, when they're there, suspended, taking place still, and when they disappear. And similarly, the Tathagata knows when feelings arise, when they're being sustained, ongoing, and when they disappear. This is the magic formula, if I may be allowed to say that, because it puts everything into perspective, especially in the sense that the Dhamma is the cure. Earlier, I was mentioning about us being so gullible when it comes to our cognition, especially when our cognition is flawed today, more so than ever in history. Despite our knowledge, our intellect, our degrees, etc. Because we have been sucked into the story, we have been sucked into the concepts, into the perceptions. Look, however, how the Tathagata, the Buddha, is talking. And by the way, that was not a unique quality of a Tathagata, to be able to see when a thought arises, when it's sustained, and when it disappears. This is something that the Buddha constantly encourages his students to inculcate, bring out, and become proficient at it. So he was constantly inviting us. And every arahant has had this ability. They worked on it throughout their spiritual career, their practice. So if we really want to address our cognitive distortions, one of the best tools, even as a trained a psychotherapist, I apply these techniques. Of course, I don't use necessarily the language of the Dhamma, but when I work with patients, this is what I do to allow them to create this space, to permit themselves the space to separate just a little bit from their thoughts, these ideas that they've taken to be so crystallized, so them. This is me, this is who I am. And just see it as something that is transitory, something that is passing. Of course, many of us will not want to see that because we have come to identify them as our, it's like it's closer to us than our last name, for example, or some other identification we have of ourselves. This is, come on. If I take away this idea, this perception, then how am I going to survive? Cognitive distortion. So the easiest tool to kind of wedge in between the concept as such and the person experiencing it, in my experience, has been the introduction of anicca, because it is undeniable. Even for someone who is clinically in any of these states, any of these mental disorders that we talk about. And then a simple question would be, is this thing ongoing? Of course it is. Yes, it is. But then you ask for specific examples. And then they become able to, as they zoom in to that incident, to that event in their day, and they follow through on the timeline of their day, they start seeing that there were gaps, in fact. In all honesty, they start seeing that, yeah, I was there, but then when I saw this person, that no longer was there. The intensity was actually less. So there were gaps. Hence, we start to put this wedge between the person and the thought. This takes us to the understanding of sati, mindfulness. Mindfulness means you're not pulled into the object. You are seeing the body as the body. You are seeing the breath as the breath. You are seeing mental states as mental states. You are seeing phenomena as phenomena, different principles. You are seeing the khandhas as khandhas. And this is another reason why we meditate, so that we can become able to see, for example, perceptions versus feelings, versus us starting to weave a story out of a memory which we identify, understand, agree to, that yes, I was sitting and suddenly this memory popped into my head. And then what did I do? Well, actually, I took those and started, building up a story around it. So sati is able to see these, and in this example, it's the aggregates I'm mentioning in the form of Dhammanupassana, but it could be just as simple as going back to the breath, the inhale and the exhale. No one is able to hold on to the inhale for long or indefinitely. Sooner or later, you're going to have to let go of that. Same with perception, same with ideas, such as the idea of self-doubt. A major cognitive distortion in these very confusing times. So my encouragement to you, for you today, is to anchor yourself. Anchor yourself. And realize that these including self-doubt or anxiety-causing or anxiety-ridden states of mind or emotions, feelings, they come, they rise, they're there for a little bit. Sometimes very quickly they disappear. But sometimes because we like some elements about it, we like to extend it, stretch it, stretch it, stretch it, until something else pops into through the sixth sense doors. And then we drop this and grab that. What happened to that? Oh, it disappeared. See what happens? So it's almost like a bell curve when we want to talk like, scientifically. Has a point of origin, sustain, boom, gone. So the more we're becoming able to observe this process again and again and again and again, we start seeing the dukkha that also comes with it, so long as we're holding on to these things. And when we talk about detachment or nekhamma or disenchantment, that's what it is. The constant ability, the ability to constantly see these processes taking place and vanishing, sooner or later, it generates within the person the sense of disenchantment. There won't be an idea or a perception, a concept that really is that loud anymore. Because the person has now seen that it has a point of origin, arising, maintains itself, and then disappears, including insights. So I know some teachers might disagree with that, but when we look at the Dhamma and compare it with our experience and what was taught in the Dhamma, in the suttas by Lord Buddha, we see that this is exactly what's happening. Now, if the person is attached to this insight or this memory, this and that, that's when we're getting dukkha. That's where we're getting dukkha. And when we talk about the anatta part of it, the non-substantiality of it, we can go back to the thought itself and see, did I even ask for this memory to pop up? Did I even ask for this feeling to show up? No, it just happened. That's part of Dhamma as well. Dhamma in the sense that nature, the order of things, the truth of the genuine experience, when you shake off all personhood and identifications with it, just we shake all that off, what's left? Oh, I didn't ask for this. It showed up. But the person who's confused, who is holding on to self-doubt, using conceit, mana, or any of these hindrances or fetters, looks at this thought as it's my thought. Well, that's not true, because you were sitting and doing something else and all of a sudden this thought arose. Okay. So many times we go into the offensive and we start fighting it. No, I need to beat my mind to submission. Restlessness much? And now we start self-deprecating ourselves. We start becoming resentful. There's dosha or dosa arising in the body, in the mind. And there's no calm. There's no samadhi. So being able to pull ourselves away and seeing the thoughts as they arise, feelings, and not attributing anything to them other than what they are. Just a thought, just a feeling. Seeing it for what it is. Yatha bhutang pajanati. This is not some like, state that one gets to see once they are an arahant. No. But once we pull ourselves out of it, this is the anatta part, and we see the mechanism that this is not in anyone's hands. This is just the natural process of things. And I don't need to get involved. It's just like that cup of muddy water that we scoop up, and then it's all brown and all that, and you put it on a table. You don't go fighting with the grains of sand or mud to kind of separate the two. But no, you wait. You observe in a detached manner. You're observing, you're witnessing, you're engaged in that sense, but nothing more. And then suddenly the water separates from the mud settles. So that is the encouragement that I want to give you today of, can we pull back and not be sucked into the cognitive distortions or the stories that we love telling ourselves, that are, by the way, instigated by these various limitless, mind you, as we all know, thoughts, experiences, concepts, feelings, despite the weight that we attribute to them. That is something we need to be very careful about. Because the thoughts, you're not your thoughts, nor are you your feelings. And this is where we are trying to attach this sense of, this is me, this is who I am, so that you can perpetuate a series of consciousnesses, somehow using gorilla glue of craving, so that you can maintain this idea of, yes, this is me, this is my life. I'm the one who's getting old. Series of consciousnesses arising, maintained for a little while, poof, gone. No need for any glue. There needs to be the humility, the kindness, the softness, almost motherly care or parental love towards. Oh, yes. And yes, self-doubt can be seen at that point as self-doubt. I see, yes. Oh, yes, it's been a while since I've had an insight. Okay, fine. Not go dwelling on the fact. Or, yes, it's been a while since I actually had a good sit. I'm doing everything right. How come it's not? Well, there's stuff going on that you're missing out, that are part and parcel of the whole process. So in this gunk is where we find what will lead us to Nibbana, what will take us to Nibbana, because we are cleaning house. We're cleaning house with every single moment of sati. And every single moment of sati pulls us out of self-doubt. Definitely pulls us out of confusion. So let's bring more of that in our days. So I will pause here and ask if there are any thoughts, comments, questions, etc. Please go ahead and start speaking instead of raising hands.
Bhante,
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. When you say that when we have distracted during the practice, come back to our goodness. So you mentioned several things about goodness, just to say that, would I kill someone? Would I, maybe steal something? Would I get intoxicated? For most of us, it's probably not difficult to say no, but what if you really do know someone who is constantly intoxicated, and that person also believe in Buddhism and want to practice? How do you talk that person into coming back to the goodness, as opposed to seeing that, okay, this is something I cannot get rid of, and as a result I don't practice because I don't want to go back? So I just want to ask you that.
The coming back to the goodness is a very personal affair. meaning it is self-generated, it is self-directed, so that you can observe, because you know ultimately, if you're being honest, whether you've been keeping precepts, for example. When I say goodness, by the way, it's also your virtues, because every time we do, even generosity is another tool that a person might use. By me keeping the precepts, let's say, at the end of the day, I feel good because no other person is going to be, no one is, including myself, will ever be hurt, because I will never steal anything. Imagine the comfort that that would bring up in a person, in my neighbor who leaves his door open, for example. They don't have to worry anymore. So that is something that is self-generated when the person knows that they have been living virtuously. Now, when it comes to someone else, that's a different story, in the sense that, again, if they have this awareness of coming back to one's own goodness, you're not going to be saying that to them or to try to convince them in the absence of such a virtue. Meanwhile, they might have done what I just mentioned earlier about generosity, for example. Not the act of generosity, but the intention behind it. That's key. How did it feel when you gave that $1 to this homeless person? Actually, it felt good. Or the person says, "Oh, I didn't think about it. So that's not a good example of a thing that they could go back to, because it must generate the sense of goodness, like you said. It's this sense of warmth in one's heart. So another person might use, let's say, if they clean their house and they make it pristine. Imagine if my mind were like this. So using whatever is available. So in that sense, we're very matter of fact and very pragmatic and practical. So whatever is the loudest. For some people, it is the belief or faith, rather, in devas, in divine beings who live on a different level, let's say heavenly beings, celestial beings. And they feel the presence of such beings. For that kind of a person, I would encourage them to have that, because when be brought into the mind, that is. So recalling that. And it just, we're looking for a trigger to pull us out of this confused state and to put us into solid, safe, comfortable lap of, the mind can settle. So we're looking for those tools, but we're not faking anything, of course. And one of the easiest ones to also do is to apply would be a smile. A smile, genuine smile to oneself. I was mentioning to someone yesterday how it's important for us to pause. Let's say if you get in your car, let's say, and you're going to drive, or you woke up and you're looking in the mirror, look at yourself and smile. Most of us have a hard time doing that. Genuinely, and say, despite all things that I think about you, you're a good person. You're not so bad. Sometimes all it takes is that. And when you're smiling, I read years ago in a book by, I think her name is Lael Lowndes, I think years ago. And in it, I think she was saying, the author, a smile displays certain experiences to the person, or feelings, rather, to the person who's observing it, as well as the person generating the smile, that is. So one of them is acceptance. Acceptance. So when a person is seeing us smile to them, we're basically telling that person who's receiving the smile, that we accept them and they feel accepted. Now, who doesn't like being accepted? Everyone. Deeply, when you dig deep, we all want that. Another emotion that it generates, the smile, is a sense of happiness, that you're okay, that things are okay, that things are okay. And when a person stands up in front of a mic, especially a responsible or a person who has authority, and they start with a gloomy face, and we go like, okay, hold on to the edge of your seat, something's gonna. Versus a person who smiles, not a politician's smile, of course, genuine smile. So it generates happiness as well. Another one is it displays confidence. It displays confidence. So this is especially in the case of us looking at ourselves in the mirror. One of the most packed parts of our day, packed with the sense of self-doubt that, oh my, we don't know how this day is going to unfold, is in the morning, when we just woken up. So when you're giving yourself a smile in the morning, you're also giving yourself a sense of confidence that it's going to be okay. Plus, you're generating happiness. Plus, you're giving yourself the sense of acceptance. And it also gives a sense of safety to oneself and to the other person, especially the person who's receiving it. So I would share those thoughts with you. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'd just like to share a past experience of myself. Well, not particularly something that I'm proud of. Okay. When I was doing my PhD, I was smoking all day, drinking all night. That was long, long, long before I, I came to the Dhamma. Well, what actually told me that I need to quit smoking and drinking was that our son was 3 years old at that time. So one day I realized that no, I didn't want my son to grow up to see daddy smoking all day and drinking all night. So I started, quitting smoking and reducing my alcohol dosage. And well, it had the alcohol part actually took me about 5-6 years to completely eradicate. So my advice is that the person who is, for example, who needs to get rid of alcohol probably needs to see that there is something or somebody who is important to him in his life. For example, it can even be a dog. That's my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We use whatever we have. I've had individuals who were suicidal, wanting to cause harm to themselves so that they can end it all. And I would ask them this question: are there people on the planet who would be able to use your skill set, your knowledge, your experience? Yeah, no one around me wants me, no one around me wants this, or I never get a chance, da 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 da. So you hear all the valid excuses, valid reasons even, for this person to want to exit life by cutting their lives short. And then you kind of broaden the scope, let's say the geography. You just pull them out of the country or the city that they're living in. Let's say you take them to Africa, or somewhere in the islands, somewhere where there is poverty and people who do not have access to the things that this person has. So long story short, the person starts seeing that they have two eyes, they have perfectly functioning ears, they have two hands, feet, they can carry weight, they can build a school, they can help a community, they can help a child learn language. So what you do to this person is you allow them a second lease on life, in the sense that because this life apparently for such a person no longer serves. And addictions is you fall into the same area. Basically, there's a lot of self-abuse going on, resentment, anger. So it's a lovely, for the defilements, lovely area for them to live in and to have you be stuck in. So the person slowly starts seeing the let's say the individual who was thinking of committing suicide starts seeing beyond the confines of their own needs, and they go away. Just like in the example that you gave, Upatissa, of you said, okay, I'm doing these things, but how is this impacting or going to impact my son in the future, who's 3 now? So you pulled yourself out of what reasons you might have to be living this kind of a life and opened it up, projected it onto the life of your own child. If this is not the living embodiment of metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, I don't know what is. The Brahma Viharas are not just some techniques we do to get to jhanas or to even nibbana. They're not just some tools. They change our lives. But in doing so, they also change the world around us. They must change the world around us, in fact. Underline must, because it's a behavioral change. And it's not just some personality change that some people say, oh, a personality change happens. How? How? Do I go ahead and treat you a little bit better than I did yesterday? When you come to me at a time where it's not suitable for me, do I demolish your self-esteem by hurling insults at you? Oh, no, wait a minute. I need to go and practice my metta now. No, metta is brought with you everywhere you go. So when a suicidal patient or someone who's an addict or someone who's just doing substance abuse, whatever, the moment they can see, they can push through this shield of ego or defilements, they can pierce through and see, get a little bit like a snapshot of the world around them. You give them a new lease on life, a new beginning. Angulimala had killed over 999 people. His mother was going to be the 1,000th until the Buddha intervened. And the moment he attained Sotapanna, at that moment, when he had raised his sword to kill the Buddha himself, and the Buddha talks to him, gives him a very short Dhamma, and the man drops everything, gets on his knees and cries, and he's a Sotapanna now. He has the eye of Dhamma. He sees it, and he takes on the robes. He goes forth. But from that moment on, he could not even harm a single fly. And one day, sometime later, as he's going about on his alms rounds in the village, and every time he went and came back, his robes would be torn. He would have like things thrown at him. This was the murderer of so many people whose family members were in the villages. But he would still go, and one day he was on his alms rounds and he heard a woman scream. in pain. She was in labor. And apparently the fetus had not turned the way it's supposed to. So it was very, very painful and difficult of a labor, if not impossible, for both of them to survive, mother and child to be. And he goes and later on he goes after the food, and he goes to the Buddha, and he tells what he saw, and the Buddha sends him back and says, go. Ahimsa, he would call him, even though his name was Angulimala. Ahimsa means harmlessness. That was his original name. But he had developed the name Angulimala, which is the opposite. So anyhow, he says, go and tell them, make sure that there's a wall, a fabric of something, a veil between you and the woman in labor. You sit outside, or you make your voice audible and say, sister, from the day of my birth, I have not harmed a being. By this truth, may your suffering and your child's suffering come to an end, and may you both survive. Something like this. And then Angulimala says, with his hands like this in front of Lord Buddha, and says, Bhante, but is that true? Because from my birth, I've killed over 1,000, almost 1,000 people. How could that be true? He wasn't quick enough. He wasn't an arahant then. He wasn't quick enough to understand what the Buddha was saying, from my birth. Birth in this case was the moment he had seen the Dhamma. And then the Buddha, out of his compassion, says, in that case, you can mention from the day that I was born in the Dhamma. From that day, since then, I have not harmed a being. By the authenticity, by the truthfulness of this statement, may your suffering come to an end in peace. And he goes to the village and he utters these words. And both mother and child are saved. And it's a very smooth, shall we say, and relatively painless labor that she goes through. And she has a healthy child. To this day in Asia and other Buddhist countries or places, people do chant these, especially pregnant women, this very short verse of Angulimala. So the transition where he had to pull himself out from his world and open up to another, sometimes that is the quickest way to both anchor yourself in goodness as well as establish the mind. And it can be so strong, so powerful, that it can take you straight to Nibbana. It's very powerful. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, questions before we close today? Next week we will have a sutta discussion. I'm not sure which one, but I'm sure I'll have Dhammadina send you a sutta title. Probably it will be Bahiya Sutta. So if there are no more questions, thoughts, or comments, then let us dedicate the merits of our practice today. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired, for the acquisition and achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Be well. May the Triple Gem bless you, and may your efforts be fruitful. May you come out of these confusing times more experienced in the Dhamma, more developed, more anchored in the truth of the Dhamma. Sukhi Hotu.